really on behalf of the President and the Vice President and the National Space Council team to thank you for pulling this all together and for working on the growth of this sector. This meeting brings together what had once been two very different technical communities, both emerging after the end of the Cold War, and have combined information technologies to create really an astonishing array of new applications. And it's particularly appropriate that we be here near Silicon Valley, which has helped drive so much of the IT world. I want to start by saying a few words about the National Space Council itself. In his first year in office, President Trump revived the Space Council. It had existed during the Kennedy administration, during Bush 41. It comes and goes depending on how you want to organize the White House. He wanted to have a focus on space across all sectors, civil, military, commercial. So he reinstated the organization. And it's really my great honor to serve as the Executive Secretary. The National Space Council reviews government policies, develops recommendations for the President on space and all space-related issues, whether they be civil, commercial, or national security. Now, the last time the Council operated, I was in the Commerce Department in Kevin O'Connell's current job, and we were dealing with the emergence of dual-use technologies after the end of the Cold War, high-resolution remote sensing, export control law changes, which made most all GPS equipment general destination items for export purposes. And so we were grappling with issues of what belongs on the national security side, what belongs on the commercial side, and how do we balance that. Now, today's space environment is quite different from the Cold War era and that immediate post-war period. We have many more countries today, we have many more partners, we have many more commercial actors all operating in space as access has become more affordable and globalized. So we talk about space becoming more democratized and more globalized than ever before. The various sectors of this industry are changing rapidly. The President has recognized this and has directed us to take a whole-of-government approach to policy making. The administration's space policies include, of course, deterring aggression from adversaries in space, growing a more competitive economy, by streamlining and simplifying our regulatory systems for commercial space activity, and sustaining American leadership in the areas of exploration and utilization of space. Now, as with many White House functions, our job is to ensure the President's priorities are implemented across the executive branch, that is, pushing down, and to resolve policy differences that arise between the different departments and agencies representing different U.S. interests, so that is, adjudicating issues that come up. Now, dual-use technologies such as GPS and remote sensing are especially important as they affect multiple agencies with very different missions and very different and sometimes competing missions. Now, it's no secret that there's a lot of interest in commercial space. The Space Foundation's latest space report said in the last 10 years, more than $24.6 billion has been invested in space companies, and more than 20% of that total coming really just in 2018. So it's been a very rapid rise. Now, these investments are indicative of both mature and emerging markets. The bulk of current revenues derive from information services such as direct-to-home TV and geolocation. This includes services like ride-sharing applications as well as business-to-business platforms such as freight management. Now, as many as 5 billion smartphones are currently equipped with GNSS chips, which of course represents a large addressable market for location-based services and applications. The last decade has seen the emergence of new types of space downstream services and companies, driven by big data, advances in data processing, cloud computing capacity. Now, this activity has been particularly strong in Earth observation and position navigation and timing. And for example, Earth observation data is being layered with other data to create products and services for agriculture and maritime businesses. High spatial resolution data sets are being joined with high temporal resolution data sources to enable more rapid decision making. Everybody is interested in data that's more up to speed and more current and more periodically refreshed. Now, it's also important to note that growth in intermediate service providers that offer data hosting and processing services are significantly facilitating the storage, processing, and distribution of data. Much of this growth is enabled by recent developments in machine learning, which has lowered the barriers and costs of analyzing these huge amounts of data. Now, the administration recognized very early on that regulations have lagged behind the speed of commercial innovation in space policy. Space Policy Directive 2, the President provided clear direction to implementing regulatory reforms that would grow the space economy. This includes space launch and reentry, commercial remote sensing licensing, export controls. The President also asked the Department of Commerce to report on how spectrum policies domestically and internationally, can be used to enhance the competitiveness of our space industries. Now, I particularly like to compliment the Secretary of Commerce, Kevin's boss, Wilbur Ross, on the progress his department has made in updating regulations and cooperation between Commerce, Defense, and State Departments. His innovations like new hyperspectral sensors, higher temporal resolution precision continues to advance. Commerce is working with the national security community to mitigate and manage the threats to U.S. forces as a result of this greater global transparency. It's a different world. We're not going back. We have to figure out how to deal with it and manage it. Now, as many of you know, Commerce is also engaged with the Office of Management and Budget and the interagency groupings to finalize a rule on commercial remote sensing. And while I really can't comment on the specific details of the process because it's still in-house, what I can say is the process striving to keep U.S. industry in the lead as an increasingly competitive global market. We are not alone. Now, not only are advanced remote sensing phenomena entering the market, but a wide variety of data management and analytical tools are creating insights in a variety of market areas, again, as mentioned, agriculture, finance, insurance. And we want to encourage American innovation and, of course, not to stifle it. Turning to GPS, the National Space Council is currently working on updates to the now, surprisingly, 15-year-old 2004 Space-Based Position, Navigation, and Timing Policy. This update is going to continue to recognize the vital nature of GPS to the U.S. and global economy, while addressing new applications in some areas such as spacecraft, navigation, weather prediction, and other things that have emerged over the last 10 years. Now, as this audience well knows, satellite signals arrive at the Earth at relatively low power and compared to terrestrial systems, and the spectrum bands they use are needed to need protection from interference. GPS remote sensing users share a common need for clean, protected radio frequencies, and commercial spectrum licenses can command billions of dollars at auction. So a major challenge for satellite services in ensuring continued access to spectrum in the face of very, very high competing terrestrial demands that, again, have billions of dollars behind them. Now, the good news is that satellites themselves are increasingly capable with high throughput, capable of delivering terabytes per second, and 5G level broadband services. Commercial communication satellites in geosynchronous orbit are soon competing with constellations of perhaps hundreds to thousands of satellites in GEO, both of them offering new mobile broadband services. Entrepreneurs are even developing optical communication platforms using lasers for high-capacity links in space. This year, the Space Council staff were part of the U.S. delegation to the 2019 World Radio Communication Conference in the International Telecom Union, and we were working to protect invaluable radio frequencies and bands that are either in or adjacent to space services. Overall, the conference was very positive for space services generally, addressing many challenging issues. These include adopting a clearer regime for large geostationary orbit satellite networks, the Starlink systems you've probably seen, as well as notification and protection of geosynchronous orbit satellite systems, Intelsat, Inmarsat, Viasat, from these large NGSO networks. The Work 19 delegates also agreed to make more satellite service allocations available and to set protection levels for Earth exploration services, that is what are used for remote sensing. And we had a number of, shall we say, spirited discussions at different spectral bands about how to do this protection from terrestrial networks. And in the end, the delegates did adopt a preliminary agenda for the next work that will address many of the important space service initiatives in the coming decade. I think the message out of this is that, again, we are not alone. There are other demands for these resources that have previously been relatively untouched, either because they were technically difficult to exploit or nobody really thought about why would you possibly want to interfere with weather satellites? Why would you ever want to interfere with GPS? Well, if your business plan makes billions of dollars, that's somebody else's problem. This is not an environment which just naturally looks after itself. It's one in which you have to actively engage and defend your interests, and that we try to, of course, work with industry to do that. The challenging news, of course, is that spectrum used for these satellite communications is under pressure, as I said. Now, the administration, let me be clear, strongly supports efforts to make more spectrum available for 5G. That has been a very top priority for us. But in doing so, we have to be mindful that we have other services and utilities that we have to protect and defend. And we want to avoid having a patchwork quilt of different bands in different countries, especially for space systems. They need globally harmonized spectrum. Of course, you have globally harmonized spectrum that's relatively clean and protected. Guess what? You're a target. So just because you do well, you always have to keep it up. So finally, I want to wind up by saying that we are confident of the ability of U.S. industry, though, to meet these future challenges through innovation and dialogue with government. And we stand with you to work toward the goal of a peaceful, market-driven growth under transparent and predictable legal and policy structures. We've heard maybe predictions of $1 trillion space economy by 2040. Sounds rather lofty, but if the government continues to remove barriers, industry continues to innovate, if we maintain an open dialogue, I think that milestone can arrive sooner than we think.